definitely.
Let's stay basketball for a second because I wanted to talk about Draymond Green and his recent comments about the WNBA. And Draymond is obviously a very vocal player. He is not shy about saying what is on his mind at any given time, and that's something admirable about him. But for me, sometimes you can also get things wrong. And when you do get things wrong in this space, it's a very public wrong.
Mm,
But I want to get your thoughts on it after I give you the rundown. He basically said that WNBA players are too busy complaining about the wage gap to focus on growing the game. He wants the WNBA to tell individual stories like the NBA did with Magic and Bird and to focus on turning the WNBA into a global game through building a platform. He also wants the companies that lobby for women's empowerment in connection to the WNBA to accompany their moral support with more financial support and commit money to the WNBA cause. He then puts the onus on WNBA players, and his quote is, "I'm really tired of seeing them complain about the lack of pay because they're doing themselves a disservice by just complaining. They're not laying out steps that they can take to change that. It's coming off as a complaint because the people that can change it are just going to continue to say, well, the revenue isn't there. So if you don't bring in the revenue, we can't up your pay." They're going to keep using that, but the reality is, as true as that is, it's an excuse because everyone says we support women's empowerment. Everyone uses it to their advantage, yet these women are not using these people who are saying these very things to their advantage. So for context, the WNBA players get paid less than 80,000 on average, and this stat is from the 1920 season, while NBA players earned 7.4 million on average in the same period. WNBA players were paid about 20% of league revenue, and NBA players are paid a little bit more than 50% of league revenue. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on what Draymond said and if you want to expand into the pay disparity as well.
Um, so I think what Draymond said was quite interesting. I'd like to hear some opposing takes on the matter, maybe from WNBA players and executives who are, close to the ground on the issue. But ultimately, I understand where he's coming from, where he says, hey, the onus when it comes to pay performance and wanting a better lot, it comes down to the performers um, trying to put down a better product in order to attract more attention, attract more eyes, get people and fans more engaged in your product. And I think that there's an argument, a reasonable argument that he kind of laid out to say, hey, we the NBA didn't always have this kind of salary. The NBA had to grow. They had to uplift stars like Michael Jordan, like Larry Bird, like Magic Johnson, Dr. J in the past, to get to a point where they became a global sensation, up to the days of now LeBron and Kevin Durant and Steph Curry. And that attention and the storylines and the drama is what drives the revenue. People wanting to watch them on TV is what drives the revenue. And so he's just saying, hey, like if you're the WNBA, complaining is one thing, and you have a right to complain, I think, but also that those complaints have to be met with action, and you should leverage the support of the people who are your apparent champions and advocates. So I agree. I kind of agree with him on that. But I also you know I temper that with an understanding of I don't also know all the ins and outs of that, and as well as I don't know all the ins and outs of what makes the WNBA a profitable business. I remember hearing in the past that the NBA actually financially supports the WNBA, and a part of the NBA's revenue goes towards the WNBA and its funding. So I don't know if the WNBA is even a profitable and self-sustaining enterprise. And so
Mhm.
it's really challenging for an institution like that to get it to be able to kind of pick itself up from its bootstraps and put out a product if on its own it's not necessarily profitable. And so if you lose money on trying to facilitate the WNBA, it's really hard to justify saying, hey, we want a pay increase. And then the other issue is ultimately that pay disparity where WNBA players are getting 20% of the revenue is problematic in my opinion. It should be closer to a CBA that the NBA has been able to negotiate where they get around 50%. So that should be the case. But otherwise, I think that this is a really interesting topic, and I'd like to hear more research to get more of a holistic understanding of the issue, as opposed to people trying to just champion the issue for social justice points in a way.
Yeah, I don't know. I fundamentally disagree with Draymond. I think that his heart is in the right place, but I think that he's ignoring misogyny
Mm,
entirely.
mm,
I think that it doesn't really take too much to just like look at any post that the WNBA posts on social media or online. All you got to do is just go in the comments and you'll see dudes that have never touched a basketball in their life, like making kitchen jokes or saying, I would never watch this. Like, what are they doing? This is dumb.
mm,
Like, there's so much hate, like on the front end, just from fans, that it is hard to get that investment if people are just not willing to watch the game because they're women. Like,
mm,
uh, if watching WNBA games, the skill level is the same and even higher in some cases. It's just that the flashy athletic plays aren't there because of biological differences. Like there's not really much that they can do about that. So it for me, it just kind of comes off as a little bit tone deaf because he does
mm.
have the access to the WNBA players in terms of knowing them and knowing some of them and being in that circle to actually ask these questions. Because to suggest that they haven't been doing the groundwork is it's kind of silly to me
Okay.
because they like why would they not do the groundwork? Like for me it kind of comes off like you don't think that they've thought about the exact things that you're saying. Like I'm sure they've thought about it way more than you have because they're actually in it. They're actually having to go play overseas during the off season to actually feed their families and support their their basketball lives. So
Right.
it just comes off a little bit like it comes from a place of privilege. And I don't think Draymond's a bad guy. I don't think he is a misogynist, but I think that his comments kind of come off a little bit on the ignorant side because it kind of comes off like the argument of a white person talking to a person of color. Like, I did it. Why can't you? Like, I started my own company and now I make six figures. So why can't you do it? And
Mm,
it's ignoring a whole lot of factors that may impede that person from achieving the same things that you have achieved. And that factor is misogyny.
mm,
Like there's just not that investment in the women's game. And it's not just the WNBA, it crosses all sports. Because if you want to look at the NCAA, uh the product for men's and women's basketball, the quality is inarguably the same. Women's college basketball is a great watch.
yeah.
It's an excellent product. But if you look at the way that the women are treated, like I don't know if you saw the stories with the differences in the weight rooms. The men had a entire decked out weight room that's appropriate for college athletes, and the women were literally given a dumbbell rack, and
Wow.
that was it. Even down to the food was entirely different, the food that they were given. So and the disparities between men and women are just so apparent, and it's certain things that the people that are in charge can choose to do in order to enforce and promote equality that they just don't do. You can look at women's soccer. The women's soccer team for the US Nationals has been more successful than the men
Yeah.
in the last couple uh Olympics and the last
over
couple games.
yeah, over the
So
last like 20, 30 years.
yeah,
Since I've
I
been
wasn't even gonna go that far, but yeah, they
yeah,
have been way more successful, but they do
yeah.
not get paid the same, despite the fact that they are more successful. And I just don't, I can't wrap my mind around that being anything else than you not wanting to treat women equally, you know?
Um, and I understand that point, and I understand that sentiment. And I think that sometimes I think there is a level of misogyny in all of this, but I also think that there's a level of revenue as well as how revenue is distributed. I don't have all the numbers and stats in front of me, unfortunately, but I do understand that there is a difference in what um which eyes are being brought to a sport, as well as who's purchasing tickets to see games, and all of those things that go into how revenue is ultimately distributed. And
Mhm.
um I think what some people would make the argument for is that, oh, because we bring in X amount of dollars, we deserve X amount of revenue. Now, I don't know what that breakdown is for, soccer or even basketball, and how what the collective bargaining agreements are around that. But I do agree that, hey, if people are bringing in championships, if people are bringing fame and notoriety to a sport and they're being champions of the sport, they should be compensated well. And I do think that if you are if yeah so I ultimately agree with you, but I think that I just temper that to say, hey, there sometimes are reasons beyond misogyny that come into play when they're trying to divvy up the pie.
I get what you're saying. I just think that the reason for the pot being so small is misogyny. That's my argument. So the reason that there isn't as much of a pot to divide is because people aren't watching women's sports because it's being played by women. So
Mm,
I'm not saying that there's an easy fix there. I'm not saying that the WNBA and the players aren't doing everything that they can to try to remedy that or try to find a solution. It's just for me to say that they're not doing enough and to put the onus on them is what I have an issue with.
mm,
So it is a problem. There is a disparity, and that disparity, because of how much men's sports make, will likely never come close to being equal. And I
right.
understand the revenue aspect of that because the NBA makes so much money. So for them to get paid the exact same, like that doesn't necessarily work out or make sense financially. But we can't put that on the players. The players are doing everything that they can and pushing the game in every way that they can. It's just that they are not receiving the support of the general public because they are women.
Mm, yeah, I mean, you're right. To some degree, at the end of the day, what Magic and Larry and Michael had to do was perform on the court. And it was the job of the media, the job of NBA executives, to, promote access to the players, to promote storylines of the players. And it is the job of the media to bring light. And they are a filtering, the media is a filtering um apparatus where they show you what's important. So if they push the WNBA and the NBA versus the NBA, they are ultimately in control of how how much attention or how little attention a subject gets. And so there is onus on outside of what the players have to do. Um, and I think you're right in some sense, like there needs to be more of an emphasis if we're gonna really see some kind of change in that regard. And so yeah, so it's not really fair to just put all the blame on the players, Yeah, I understand where you're
Right.
coming from in that regard.
Yeah, it's not an easy fix, and it's not a conversation that can really truly shed enough light on the problem within, an hour. but
Yeah.
it is something that needs to be addressed for sure. And hopefully this will spur on conversations where there are actual actionable points that can be taken by men and by women in order to help the women's game advance as much as the men's has, at least within that context.